Uh, Good morning, Eyal. Thank you very much for accepting this interview.
It's my absolute honor and pleasure to speak to you, and I admire the ambition and the kind of mission that your publication has here in Colombia and beyond Colombia and the Latin American world. So it's an absolute pleasure to.
The honor is for us, Eyal. The first question I want to ask to you is, your work began to attract the attention of the international art community with the publication of the interview in October in 2016 by Hal Foster and Yves Lanois. However, you have been exhibiting your research in art spaces for a long time, probably since 2010, as a critical examination of the role architecture plays in the occupation of the Palestinian territories. Tell us how this all started out little by little.
In 2002, I was invited by the Israeli Committee of Architects to curate an exhibition of the best of Israeli architecture. They didn't know who they were asking. It was my response was to create an exhibition in a book that show how architecture is used by Israeli settler colonial practices and how they are using settlements, roads, bridges, the wall, checkpoints, etc., to dominate Palestine. And I said, you know what? That is the best of Israeli architecture, the military architecture, the militarized and the occupation of Palestine. So I put up this show. Of course, they censor it immediately, and they burned or pulp, in fact, 5,000 copies of the book, which is an idiotic thing to do because immediately everybody wanted to know what was being pulped in there. But let's say that my career, even before I was a writer, is with a censored exhibition. So my career starts by mobilizing politically the kind of curatorial infrastructure that the art world has very generously established, and using that infrastructure to do other things. So this is how it started. From there, I was writing about Israeli colonialism, etc. I was exhibiting throughout, working together with artists and curators to expose human rights violation, because I believe that artists and curators have a certain visual skill, let's say, that is incredibly important in the exposure of facts, rather than putting a kind of an emotional gloss on politics, which is what somehow the division of labor between investigators and artists are. So the investigators who do the investigations, usually, very often, truth commissions, human rights organizations, political movement work with artists, but they kind of expected to put the heart on the sort of like investigative, political material, political work that needs to be done. And I believe that, you know, to engage politics, you need to engage with it on a material level. So this is how the idea to break this equation that separates that division of labor and to bring artists already into absolutely necessary investigative workflow, working with historians, with investigative journalists, with scientists, with lawyers, to produce the facts rather than kind of spin them off in particular ways. That is what forensic architecture tried to do. And our understanding of aesthetics entered into that. So our understanding of aesthetics is not to aestheticize something and to put it in a museum, etc. But aesthetics as a means of investigation. In my new book with Matthew Fuller, it's called Investigative Aesthetics, we exactly describe the way in which we need to understand aesthetics as the way in which the world presents ourselves to it, the question of the sensible, the question of sensorium. What is the aesthetics of architecture, of a road? What's the aesthetic capacity of plants to register radiation, pollution, or banned chemicals? Right? Aesthetics is the way in which the surface of the leaf, the wall of the building, a surface of a video, of a photograph, register And the act of harvesting that what is registered is a deeply committed ethical political aesthetics. It's the aesthetics of the trace. So that you, in order to read that trace, you need to tune yourself very carefully to minute things, minute details within that material surface in order to say what is happening. But it's not only one material surface that we need to look at. It's never only one photograph. Yes, some photographs or videos capture the perpetrator and the victim inside the single frame. You have the whole story. That video can go circulating virally, but for each one of those cases, you have thousands of partial images. Something that happened before, something that happened after, something that happened to the side of an event of, say, police murder of a racialized person on the streets of Chicago or the streets of London or the streets of Bogota or the streets of many other places in Colombia that is happening right now. You need to connect things. The art of connecting those material traces. We would investigate maybe a bullet hole on a wall. We will investigate the kind of, something that is registered on the street. We would collect hundreds, if not thousands of videos, and the architecture is bringing them together, is weaving a story between all those disparate facts of evidence, creating an evidentiary aesthetic matrix of registration, bringing together registration of memory with registration of trace, material evidence, testimonies, and videographic evidence. Architectural models are there to synchronize all these traces together to build. And our idea is, in order to see, to learn how to see, we have everything available to us, we just don't know how to see. In order to see, you need to build, you need to construct relation between things. This is where architecture comes into being and becomes important. And this is why it is at the same time a political, ethical, judicial act, but it's also an aesthetic act. And this is why the same material can happen and be performed in the national or international court, in Truth Commission, in Human Rights Report, but it can also be performed in museums and in galleries, and each one of those forums open another facet of this element. What you can say in court is very limited sometimes. You need to establish the fact, you need to be very careful. You need to build very strong methodological report. You need to show how you know what you know. You need to expose your sources. When you are in a gallery, historical, you can connect an incident into the long history in which it is located. That's not the interest of the court. For that you need art and cultural domain to do that. We call it the long duration of a split second. Split second is what police says whenever they shoot a racialized person. It's a split-second decision. It was a mistake. Yes, those mistakes are always done by Israeli soldiers against Palestinian kids, by American US policemen on black motorists, etc. So, is it a mistake? Or is it that in a molecular level, and I'm connecting to your question about molecules, in a molecular level of time, in the split second, you can find a long history. And that is our aim. And this is another thing that in our upbringing as theorists and artists, we would try to make kind of much bigger claims from minutiae, from diving into the molecular level of an incident and finding historical truth in it. So that is, maybe we covered now 3-4 questions.
Yeah, very, very interesting, and that is an answer that opens up a lot of questions. But the second question I have in this questionnaire, Eyal, is usually our research ends up as work that leads to its museification in the Gallery or Museum, without much pragmatic significance outside the white cube. How has your work been received within the artistic field?
I'll tell you a story. We were invited to show a work in Documenta. It's a big exhibition in Germany, big honor. We got a very small space. We showed a case that happened in Kassel, where the Documenta happened. where neo-Nazis killed a young Turkish boy in the presence of a German Secret Service agent. So we exposed the presence of the Secret Service agent there. And we put this small video in Documenta. When the first reviews of Documenta happened, they said, oh, it's a very interesting piece. Immediately it started to be cues there. But they said, this is evidence, this is not art. Immediately, what happened after is that parliamentarians, judicial, police officers, many people from the political field came to see that exhibition. And then they took that video from Documenta to the Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry to ask why a Secret Service agent is involved in a neo-Nazi crime. When we presented it there, the defenders of that person said, this is art, this is not evidence. So, you know, it doesn't belong.
Let's get it back to the museum, the evidence.
Yeah, but the museum said, no, this is evidence. So, in a sense, I think that idea is very important, but it's not about working outside the white cube. It's about what links you can make between an action that happens in a white cube and an action that happens in a world, how you can mobilize attention through the art world. And this is what happened in that case in Kassel. Parliamentarians, judges, police officers came to the museum and invited it to the political forum just because it was in an art form. So our idea is not about in or out, is how you gear one to the other.
It's a strategic decision.
What kind of relations you build. But then I see also in your next question, and I want to take it now, is that sometimes that gearing of having a piece in the media, the same piece in the art, the same piece in court, leads to other problems. Because the art world itself is not a neutral white cube to simply present the work. It has its own politics, it has its own funding, it has its own involvement in crime or international crime. So if we learned that, because previously we were actually invited to show political work in art spaces and try to use it in that way. And only with the Whitney invitation, they invited us to the Whitney Biennale.
That's
and they said, no, I'm picking it up. and they said, you know, show your work on police violence. And no, we want to use the place of the white cube to investigate the institution itself. Because as deputy head of the Whitney board was actually made the money, maybe that money is what paid for our exhibition, by selling tear gas. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to investigate that. And together with many activists, including the colonized displays, I see...
Noah Fisher maybe was involved too?
Who?
Noah Fisher.
I don't know.
It's a guy who played a key role with the colonized displays. But continue, Eyal.
Yeah. So, we need to actually understand that the museum itself could exist within the matrix of international crime. And it's natural, because it's expensive things to run museums. Art is atrociously expensive, unacceptably expensive, as a kind of rarefied community instead of like a political engaged one. So you need a lot of money. The artists that sell their work for extortionate amount of money are complicit with bringing that money in, that money that is based on crime, the base that we feel on our scars, the money that comes from repression of civil society, the money that comes from repression of social movement in different places. It's not simply, you know, if there was be no market that is blown up completely in the exploitative art market, you wouldn't have the tycoons there. Because actually doing socially engaged art doesn't cost so much, I have to tell you. You can do it. And we need to break that diagram. And you can break it by attacking the tycoons. And you can break it also by insisting, yes, artists need to get paid, every labor needs to get paid. We need to be paid decently. But, you know, the kind of insane commodification of art is what brings criminals into the art world. And it needs to be dealt with also on this level.
That's an extraordinary remark you've done. Maybe the fourth question is answered
Yeah.
already. What kind of relationship does forensic architecture maintain with the art market? And what are the sources of funding for the work that you develop?
Yes. Well, we are not in the art market.
Some machines bought your artworks?
I will explain. We arrange acquisition of our work to create historical record of different cases. So, for example, the MUAC in Mexico City has acquired the Ayotzinapa case. It is part of now their collection. It's part in the, you know, the Mexican state, you know, kind of cultural field archive, where it should be. You know, in the ancient world, you know that if you want a book to survive, you need to have it in 3 libraries: in Alexandria, in Constantinople, and in Rome. Fire in one, the books would survive the Middle Ages in another. For us, the question of acquisition is a question of preservation. It's a question of making the work available for the public. When MUAC or when any other museum, and we only sell to public institutions, when they have that, they have the entire record of a case, how it was made, the communication that went into it, the old files that went, you know, the kind of older files, and we insist on a right of a updating, of changing the work as we find new facts. So, you know, you can find a work and we can throw away 90% of it and put something very simple instead. You don't have the right to sell it on. You have the duty to preserve it and the duty to open it up to students and researchers. So this is a very kind of important, I think. It took us years to develop that kind of acquisition policy. We've done it with a great curator, maybe one of the greatest curators in Latin America, Cuauhtemoc Medina in Mexico.
I know him very well, yeah.
That advised us on how to do that. And it really is an issue of public access and presentation. We do need to finance our work. As I say, you know, artists, investigators, architects, technologists, we're about 30 of us, and you know, paying 30 salaries is also something that is an incredible responsibility on me. We need to, and we do not work in any exploitative manner. Our people are being paid.
Well paid.
They are paid with all the social kind of like benefits that come with public sector payment, as they should be, because they do one of the most important and difficult work that happens now in the cultural field. We finance our work through academic grants, through human rights grants, through sometimes through commissions. So people that if people could pay, they would contribute to the cost, the effective cost of a case, and sometimes loans to exhibition, etc., help us pay the bill for a particular investigation to be done. So these are the material facts of our practice.
Okay, Eyal. Can you talk us a little bit more about exactly you're focusing on Warren Buchanan's exhibition and the video you did showing evidence of how the products done by Safari Land was involved?
I think we covered that.
We covered it before, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 5, the inflation of today's symbolic culture does not allow us to discern between truth and fiction, lies, alternative facts, fake news, and post-truth. I think that your work helps to invert the equation of imagination and put it at the service of the new art that no longer produces more symbols, but mitigates them. For example, Lucas Villa's video is not a fiction, but a piece of blunt truth that helps us to understand what happened that night. We can understand forensic architecture's work as a gesture of artistic desymbolization in the midst of a society that builds symbols everywhere to fit the discourse of deception. What do you think of this personal perception of your work? That instead of creating more fictions,
from the art, you contribute to mitigate the lying narratives of the states that seeks through dissection to deny their responsibilities?
I think that I am getting extremely frustrated with US Americans and Europeans thinking that the reality of post-truth is anything new. Welcome to the world of, repressive states and colonizing states, one of which I grew in, another you actually grew in, where we are governed through lies, we are governed through the destruction of evidence for many years already. So I think the shortness of historical memory of making post-truth anything new is very concerning for me. Be that as it may, it is true that political action that operates within the field of verification, and I prefer the word verification to verité, veritas, etc., even though it comes from the same root, because it says truth as a verb, not as a noun. It's not a transcendent thing. It's not something that comes from the mouth of a politician or a priest or a rabbi, but it comes as an immanent practice of society. Verification, open verification, is an immanent collaborative practice that is immanent and that is building communities of practice in describing, creating a metapolitical position, describing the material condition of the world on which political struggle happens. You need to establish the facts in order to actually kind of like even conduct a political struggle. Every political struggle on the basis of environmental destruction or climate chaos you need to establish those facts. And how do you establish facts in an area where facts are so precarious, where facts are attacked by the police and by the state, other state institutions, is by creating those commons, groups that work together to do that, rather than saying we need to rely on the columns, of the pillars of power knowledge that govern our society, on the press. Yes, of course, I support free press. But is it that we need to engage post-truth by donating to New York Times and Washington Post? No. We need to support new groups like Baidu and like 070, Colombian, some of them grassroots groups that struggle on the ground and struggle about facts. These are not people that sit in offices and kind of, render a judgment on things. The battle of truth happens in the streets and in the lab and in collaborative work between aesthetic practitioners and journalists and lawyers. And this is why the Lucas project was so important, because it was led by that group on the ground, including people and students, friends of Lucas. It included other journalists here in Bogota, and included a group based in the UK, but Latin American researchers there with Bellingham, and it included us producing the spatial analysis for that. And this is how it should go, through collaborations. This is not a forensic architecture art piece. It's forensic architecture intelligence meeting intelligence of grassroots movements here, and creating an alternative truth production to that of the state. Open verification, immanent truth production rather than transcendent one. Evidence is a matrix, and the matrix is made of threads. And each thread belongs to a different type of evidence. There is testimonies, there are videos, there are photographs, there are satellite images, there are material elements, there are sometimes medical data that you deal with. Those threads need to be woven together into a construction. That construction is never solid. It's not like a solid concrete architectural building. In fact, it's an elastic construction. It is always under movement. At any given state, I would say where we are in the investigation, every new thread that you build into it would create an adjustment within the structure itself. We need to leave gaps. You need to leave air between those threads, otherwise they cannot move. And otherwise, you know, one other fact that come in creates a destruction. A solid building would collapse if you put pressure on it, if you crack it. An elastic building will adjust. And this is our ethos of evidentiary work. خلاص هذا هو